So this first example, and I took out everybody's names and just put A and B for everything. Distribution of blackjack scores of A and B when playing blackjack against each other are different, as B scores were right skewed, which means that most of B scores were smaller than the mean score. The other one's scores were about symmetrical, which means that person's mean and median score were about the same. The data peaks at 19 or 15 to 19, while A's peaks at 20 to 24. A had a higher mean than median A. One of those is A and one of them is B. I think that was B. The very beginning, distribution of blackjack scores of A and B when playing blackjack against each other are different. I think that's a very strong start. Does it look like a really long run-on sentence? Probably. Do I care? No, not really. So I consider these to be what? Vocab. What's something else I look for? Say it again. Context. That's where I thought this started out really strong. And then from there, what's my context? I think this is one to where it's not bad, but it could have gotten a lot better really quick. And so I'm kind of showing you that like in between of making it better. What's another thing I look for? Numbers. Are there numbers included? Yes. Is shape a little bit less obvious with how you include numbers? Yes. Were the numbers included correctly here? Yes. I think the numbers could have been included more efficiently here and put within the problem itself. What's the other thing I look for? What is another thing I look for? Explanation. So it's what I usually call interpret. This is probably what I would count as interpret. What else? There's one other thing. Compare words. Here is going to be pretty obvious, and that's really where I'm going to be looking for it for shape. Shape is kind of hard to compare when they're two different things. So the one thing about this one that I would have changed is I would have chosen to put these within the data. So I might have said, right here, are right skewed, which means most of this person's scores were smaller than the mean. That's correct. Does that completely justify right skewed? It talks about the fact that most of them are below the mean. I understand that's correct. What does it really mean but to say that it's right skewed? A lot of low values and less high numbers. I would have liked to see that included a little bit better. But even so, you could have said something like right skewed, which means they peaked at the lower numbers between 15 to 19 with less games getting more than 19 points, or less games as the more points you got, something like that. Do you see the difference in between where they were and where they could be? Like, that's the kind of thing that most of you need help with right now, is just that next step. Outliers. There appears to be no outliers on either A or B's graphs. This means there were no games where there were uncharacteristically high or low points. Do you see anything issues? Knowing that you did the same work last night. So why should you not say there appears to be? You have all the data, which means you have to calculate, which means, and they might have done the work for it. I was just looking at the wording itself. I have to see work on there, which might be in a different place. That's fine. So I would switch this to there are no outliers, and I would have my work to show. Is this correct? So I would, Is that definition correct? Yes, I would have expanded a little bit. So where's context in this problem? You could get a lot stronger than that. So say the same thing, but explain it to somebody who has no idea what game we just played. Which means, and now you would have had, the other thing that didn't address was, it says for A or B's graph, but I would have mentioned that in the context. Neither player had any games where the amount of points that they scored was uncharacteristically higher or lower than the rest of that player's games. So, like, there weren't any where they scored a whole lot less or a whole lot more than the other games they played. Again, straight to the T, stuff is there. I would have just expanded a little bit to make it better. I think all these the four that I'm going over right now are decent. I would have just taken it to the next step. So the median of player one scores were slightly less than, and I think in both of these, I could have done more with context. I'm going to kind of talk about that one as we go. Median of player one scores are slightly less than player two's median. 19 and 20 respectively is the word you use when you're saying that. Meaning that player two scores split in half were higher than player one scores split in half. Is that right? Does this make sense? Like, what about them was higher? Like, I have two halves now. Do you see what I'm saying? You would have said the point, like, the bottom, you could have said, like, the bottom 50% of player one scores were higher than, like, I don't know. I feel like you're not getting the whole message across there when you're saying they're split in half or higher than they're split in half. Well, median is where it splits in half, not splitting it in half. I don't love that one. Where's context in this problem? And that's it. So incorporate that. Half the time player one scored less than 19, which is only slightly lower than player two's half being below 20. My other thing here is, this is something I have not talked about yet. They made the decision to go with this, right? But then here they're saying this. Are they saying the correct thing in both of those? Are they contradicting themselves completely? No, slightly less and then very close but nearly equal. That's fine. But if it were farther than this, don't argue against yourself. Like, it's very easy for somebody to say they're less and then argue the whole point of one being less than the other and then come back at the end and say, but they're pretty close, so they're not that different. Well, don't argue that they're close if you just argued that they're different. Like, don't argue. You're arguing against yourself in a one-way argument right now. So this one is fine, but it helped me think about saying don't argue against yourself. I think this is one that I just wanted to... Player one has an IQR of 4.5 points, which means the middle 50% of player one's games were within 4.5 points of each other. Player two has an IQR of 3.5 points. This means the middle 50% of player two's game were within 3.5 points of each other. Player two has less variability, 3.5, regarding points within the middle of the 50% of their games. Player two has more variability, 4.5, regarding points within the middle 50% of their games. What's happening here? How can I improve this? I think that this got repetitive. Now, if you feel the need to get repetitive because you want to make sure you include everything, I'm totally okay with it. If you say that player one or player two has less variability than player one here, you don't have to say both of these sentences. If you've already said the 3.5, you don't have to say it again. But so that was a good one where they just got repetitive where they could have kind of stopped. Okay, so this is extremely important. We've done this here. Oh, sorry about the at Man, we've always, as long as I've been here, done something with reviews that is extremely helpful. And now, being the fact that we are a fall semester taking an exam in May, this is going to be even more helpful than ever before. And if you've ever had Sullivan, I think she makes you do it for all of her classes. Before any test, you have to make your own review. I have enjoyed it so much, and it has been so helpful for all of my classes, or all of my AP classes, that I actually started doing the exact same thing in grad school, the exact same way that we make you guys do it. Only, of course, that I'll get grade for it. So you are making your own study guide. Because it is going to be so influential for us, because you're going to go 5 months without ever seeing me before you take your AP exam, I think I'm going to count these as quiz grades. I am not going to tell you the way you have to do it, because I want you to do it catered to the way you learn. But I will absolutely critique it to things that are not included that should have been. In a typical year or typical chapter test, I am not going to go through like this and say, here are the main topics. I'm doing this because it's our first one. I get you don't know what to expect on the first one. So I would definitely take a picture of that real quick. And that's just chapter 1. And now that doesn't mean, like, that's me talking about talking points too. And then that's chapter 2. So you are going to make your own study guide. And even in year-long classes, we usually go at the end of the year and ask them to do this like reflection. And they say, what is the most helpful thing that you did for your entire year-long class to help you on the AP exam? Hands down, everybody always says the study guides I made for myself for every chapter. And if they say that wasn't the most thing, they literally write, I should have spent more time on the study guides that I made for every chapter. So you are making this packet that's going to be at the AP exam. You're going to go, oh, these are the key points that I should go through, and these are the ones that I should study. Now, being stereotypical here, I'm going to have a bunch of girls who make this really pretty, color-coded, color-coordinated, everything sectioned right. That's kind of how I do it, just because I'm thinking colors. And then I'm going to have some guys who just do everything in pencil. I don't care about that. It is made towards you. Yes, I said that was very stereotypical. Guys can do in colors, girls can do in pencil. I don't care. But that's typically what I get a lot of that. I don't care the format of it. I care the consistency of the content. So you make a study guide well that's going to help you in May. Starting now, for every test we ever do, it is due on the day of the test. If you take your test and then you're done, is it going to be very helpful to go make one of these? Not really. But it is so important to have a detailed one because of the AP exam that I'm going to let you turn yours in on Tuesday just because I'm telling you last minute and I want them to be good enough that they don't get rushed. So even if you have to finish some of it after the test, like you want it to look good and you just don't have time to get there or something. So you're going to turn this in on Tuesday, even though your test is tomorrow, but technically you should have made it before your test, obviously. Questions in general about that? So I'm going to be like, if this were a typical test, I might flip through and I'm going to look through really quick. And one thing I'd be like, I would definitely expect to see an empirical curve drawn with the percents written on there. And that might be one of the things I look for. And I might have like 10 things in my head that I'm going to go through and make sure that you have. I'm looking for those main things, and that's kind of how I grade it. Yeah. Any questions on how I want that, like notebook paper? You'll end up putting it like in a folder with like the grad stays or a notebook or something. So like we'll keep it all together. But spend time on that because it is going to be extremely, extremely helpful. If you've ever asked anybody that's been in our class before, they will tell you the same thing. Okay, now let's talk first. Of those talking points right there, I want to know what I want to cover as a class before we get started. So missing here, I'll generally talk through real quick. Individuals, that means who are individuals? Variables, categorical versus quantitative, numbers, not numbers. These can be numbers, but not meaning numbers. Difference between marginal and conditional. We'll put A1, A2, C1, C2. I could do a lot more, but find the probability of the distribution of, or what is the distribution of A? Is that marginal or conditional? Marginal, because I'm not looking at this at all. I would just take these numbers out of your total. But if I said, what is the relationship between A and C, we become conditional. Segmented bar graphs, do I make those from marginal or conditional distributions? Conditional. We talked about stuff with bad and misleading graphs. Dot plots are pretty straightforward. Stem plots, if I do back to back, that means I have how many of them? 2. I've got one going right, one going left. When I split, how can I split? By increments of 5 or increments of 2. So let's say we're dealing with tens, right? This right now is what numbers could go here? 0 through 9, which is how many numbers? 10. So if I split it like this, now what numbers would go here? 0 through 4. What numbers would go here? 5 through 9. So because we had 10 numbers that we had to split up, the only 2 factors of 10 are 2 and 5. So you can only do split as 2 stems or 5 stems. Does that make sense? I can't do like 3 because that doesn't divide equally. What is 5 number summary? Before that, minimum, quarter 1, median, quarter 3, max. What percent is between each of those? 25%. So like what percent is above the Q1? 75%. These are your keywords to look for through SOCs. We just went through some SOC stuff. Histogram, you know what a histogram is. What are my options for measure of center? What are my options for measures of spread? There is a right and wrong one to pick if I'm dealing with this one. So if my graph is what, I would choose mean as my center. It's fairly symmetrical. If I choose mean, so why do I choose mean? Wait, no, let me go backwards. When do I choose median? When it's skewed or there are extreme outliers. Why do I choose median if it's skewed? The outliers do not affect it as much. If it is skewed and I choose median, what do I choose as spread? IQR. Why? That is not a question I have explicitly addressed. What was your answer for why you chose median? So why do I choose IQR? It's still going to be less affected by those outliers because I've got 25% here and 25% here. That's not something I've explicitly said, and I want to make sure I address that. So if it is symmetric, What should you choose as your center? As your center. Mean. It's almost, we're not really at the point where you can answer a good why yet, other than the fact that, like the bell-shaped curve, we can do a whole lot with it when we get to normal. We kind of lean that way. Your argument with why not to do mean is better than why you wouldn't choose mean. If you choose mean, which spread should you choose? Standard deviation. So what is the least descriptive measure of spread? Range. Interpret. I want to make sure I go through these real quick. We talked about shape a little bit. How do I interpret left skewed without context?
Higher values.
What kind of higher values?
More higher values.
A bulk of higher values with less as the number of x whatever as x values decrease. Interpret bell shape. Where do I start? If I talk about here, what do I talk about here? This is where it does what? Peaks where? In the middle. And then what does it do? And you might say like decrease, just had it in my head. Decreases equally as you, or decreases at the same rate going either direction as the x values increase and decrease. What is the interpretation of mean? What is the equation of mean? So what is the interpretation of mean? If you took it all and added it, put it all together, and then split it equally among all of them, that's what it would be. Interpretation of median. What's here?
50%.
What's here?
50%.
50% of both above and below. Interpret standard deviation. What is the definition of standard deviation?
The average value away from the mean.
Average distance away from the mean. So if we were talking about, I was reading one, I should put it up there. Somebody's socks, they had like 2.93, I think, as their standard deviation. And just for context here, let's say, and just for the sake of it for now, let's say this was 18. So on average, they scored within 2.93, or they were 2.93 points away from their mean score of 18. So you're interpreting it literally as average distance from the mean. IQR is what? We just kind of went over that in one of them. The range of middle 50%, middle 50% were within this much of each other. Range, highest minus lowest, the highest one was this much higher than the lowest one. Outliers, what's that word we usually use that they use on the 1I whatever? Whether you use appears and not appears, and then we usually say there are or there aren't any that are uncharacteristically, and then higher or lower. And make sure you always calculate outliers if you can. So you use the word appears if you can't calculate. Questions on any of that you see that you think would be beneficial for the whole? I'm not going to go over this much because this is what we've done for like the last 3 days. So I think y'all be fine with this. Percentiles means you shade which way? Always left. Percent you did better than. What's your definition of z-score?
Number of standard deviations away.
Number of standard deviations away from the mean, above or below. Can you always find a z-score regardless of the shape of the data? Can you always find a z-score regardless of the shape? Yes. But you can't go past it unless what? Unless it says normal. Empirical rule, what about 3 numbers? 68, 95, 99.7. Transforming data. center gets changed by everything. Spread, like center gets changed by both multiplying and adding. Spread only gets affected by which one? Multiply, because add would be just slide it. Normal probability plot, what goes on the x-axis? Normal probability plot, what goes on the y-axis? Z-scores, your x values go on your x-axis. And you are looking for your normal probability plot to be if your data is normal.